live life. And when you speak about being and doing, I think one of the major problems, Eckhart, for our world and for us is that we really aren't raised to believe in our extraordinariness, about how extraordinarily, how divine we are, that we're all not just pieces of God, but that we are all God. We are all part of God. And that's something we carry around with us. And this ordinary part of us, the part of us that is, called the ego, the part of us that believes that who we are is what we accumulate and what we accomplish and what other people think of us, and the part of us that is separate from everyone else, and the part of us that feels like we have to own things and so on, and that we're born into this world of where there's nothing to do. There's like when a baby's inside a mother's womb, what does she have to do? What does the baby have to do? In the Tao says, the Tao does nothing, and it leaves nothing undone. It's become my son's favorite mantra, because I say, Sans, come on, do something, let's go. He'll say, I do nothing. And I leave nothing undone. So, but this part of it, so we're sort of snatched out of that perfection and programmed into a life of accumulating and achieving, and what we start to believe that this is who we are. And we never get to the part of us that is extraordinary, because the ordinary part of us feels that we're having a successful life if we go through the motions, if we go through school, if we get good grades, if we get into the right school, if we meet the right person, if we fill out the forms, if we pay our taxes, if we don't get arrested, if we follow the rules. This is like this is an ordinary life. And I speak to an extraordinary life, and I have so much respect for the work that you have done over the years. But the extraordinary part of us still has ordinary in it. I mean, we still have to follow the rules, most of them, and we still have to fill out the forms. And I'm sure you pay your taxes, right? And and so you can be an extraordinary being, but you still have ordinariness in it. But beyond ordinary is this, is what we call the soul, because we just don't have another name for it, And in the Tao Te Ching, the opening lines of the Tao say, the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. So you're stuck already. You can't even call it anything because it goes into two-ness. Now it is what it is and the name that you call it. But the extraordinary part of who we all are is the soul. It's that invisibleness that's formless, that has no boundaries, it has no beginnings, it's birthless, it's changeless, it's deathless. And this part of us doesn't care about winning, it doesn't care about owning, it doesn't care about happiness, it doesn't care about being better than anyone else. It just wants to expand. It wants to grow. It's miserable. The soul is miserable when you contain it, when you put a fence around it, when you put a label on it, when you tell it what it can be and what it can't be. All of us have this extraordinariness called the soul, which is infinite. Because if it wasn't infinite, it would be finite. And if it was finite, you'd be able to find the end of it or the beginning of it. So because it's not finite, it's infinite, this means that what does infinity mean? It's just always expanding. It's just, there's no end to it. There's no end to it. This is the part that we need to address, I think, within ourselves, is this infinite part of us that doesn't need to fit in, doesn't need to be right, doesn't need to be better than anybody else. It just wants to expand and grow and not be told, this is what you can do, this is what your limits are, this is what's not possible for you. And I've always, I don't know about you, but always, my entire life have just been intrigued by extraordinary people, by extraordinary events, by people who can do things. As soon as I see someone can levitate, I was like, I want to know all about that. How do you go about this? Someone who can, Carolyn Mace talks about defying gravity, or Joel Goldsmith says that in the presence of the God realized, the laws of the physical world do not apply. Can you make electronic equipment stop with your consciousness and so on? And Those kinds of things, those extraordinary accomplishments. I just read a book that just blew me away. I don't know if you've read this, called Unbroken by Laura Hillerbrand. Have any of you read that? Unbroken? It's one of the great reads you'll ever read in your life, and it's a story of a man who survived impossible things, and he's now 94 years old, and he was shot down during World War II, and he cruised on a raft across the Pacific Ocean. Every word of it is true, but the extraordinariness of this being and what he accomplished and how he survived, those things. I just think that we need to address ourselves, people like us who have a big audience, to creating a world of extraordinary people who look beyond what they were programmed to become, ordinary, filling out the forms and so on, to those where we can expand and really change the world. This kind of thing can really, truly impact the entire consciousness of this planet. I really think it can happen.
Yes. And the basis for that, so in a way, we are talking about creating, and earlier you mentioned that part within everyone, the essence that is timeless and infinite, and that's the being. And so conscious union with that can then lead to awakened, as I call it, awakened doing. So if we go back for a moment to the being part, as Wayne was speaking and as I am speaking, pointing towards that dimension within you, the question is whether at this very moment, so that it's not another belief in your mind. I mean, it's comforting to believe I am an infinite being, but that's a belief. And then can you sense the reality of that? And as we sit here, can we sense the reality of that within ourselves, where you are no longer deriving your sense of identity or your sense of who you are from ideas in your head? That's the start. Because in the normal consciousness, which is unconsciousness, who you feel you are, which of course is the limited self, the conditioned self, the time-bound self, what the Buddha called the self, the delusion, what Jesus pointed to when he said, deny thyself, as one of the essential points of his teaching. Deny thyself, been misinterpreted by the churches as if you had to say, oh, miserable me. That's not it at all. Deny thyself is recognize the unreality of that self, of that basing your sense of who you are on what ideas you hold in your head, thoughts, in other words, that tell you about your story, about who you are, and never feeling really fulfilled. It's always not quite sufficient, so you need to defend this mental edifice of who you are, and so on. You need to add to it. Maybe then I'll be fully myself when I achieve that. So at this moment, can you sense that within you there is an unconditioned, timeless consciousness which has nothing to do with thinking, which is prior to all thinking, which is, you cannot make it into an object and say, there it is, because it's the eternal subject, it's the I, the one I, it's spacious presence. I'm just using different pointers because different pointers work for different people. It's spacious presence. It's a sense of deep aliveness that has nothing to do with your history whatsoever, and nothing to do with your future whatsoever. So if you can touch that within you, that is the liberation from the false sense of self. And once you can sense that, it's actually it's exhilarating to feel that which transcends the limited self in you, that presence that cannot be conceptualized, that cannot be named, the Tao. This is why we're here, to experience
Exactly.
that.
The great saint in India named Muktananda was asked the question, what is real? And he said, that is real, which never changes, period. So now you try to define yourself using that definition. Like the question Eckhart is addressing here is, who am I? And the first thing that comes to mind is, well, I'm this body, But how many bodies have you been in since you incarnated just this time? How many bodies have you shown up in? You were in one this big, you were in a little toddler body, you were in one that stands like this, like all my teenage daughters do, and roll their eyes. I was in a 20-year-old body, and I just saw a picture of it. I just did a new public television special, and I saw that picture floating across. And when I was in that body, I really believed it was real. But it's been 50 years, and I can't find it. I don't know where it is. Like there's nothing in this body. There's not one cell left over in this body that was in that body. And that's true for every single person watching and every single person in this room. So that who you are is that which keeps occupying new bodies on a regular basis. In fact, if Deepak were up here with us, he would say that the body you came in to watch this presentation with will be very different than the one that you will leave here with. And we can't see the changes going on in that place, but we're in a world. So if everything that is changing isn't real, who we really are, there's a higher self within each and every one of us, or a highest self. And a higher self, to me, one of my teachings was that the Creator puts a spark of Himself into each and every creation. So there's a spark of God in each and every one of us. But my experience, especially lately in my own life, has been that that spark can grow from a spark to a fragment, to a segment, to something bigger. It can get as big as a soccer ball. It can get bigger and bigger inside of you until you ultimately reach another conclusion, that the same conclusion that Jesus came to when he was about to be stoned because he blasphemed. He said, "Why would you stone me?" And they said to him that we stone you because you are a man and you claim to be God. And he said, "Is it not written in your laws that I have said, you are gods? You are gods." This comes right out of the mouth of Jesus. And St. Paul, writing in Philippians, in his letters to the Philippians, says, "Have in you the same mind as Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God." But we've taken this idea of this place that you're speaking of, this perfect infinite presence, this place of divine peace, and interpreted the words, "I am God," or "you are God," to be the God that we've created in our own images. This God who's angry, and this God who has the power to heal, but restricts it to some and gives it to others. This God that demands payment and fancy, buildings and gold embroidered costumes and so on, and created a God like that. When in fact, again, out of the scriptures, Jesus said, when asked who is God, he said, God is love. I mean, I don't know, is there a better word for it than that?
Yes. And of course, the impermanence and the changing body, or inhabiting different bodies, the same applies to the psychological, because the body is the physical form, and then that's the starting point for most people's sense of identity. That's, I am this external appearance, and so on. The next place that people use to define their identity through, of course, is the psychological self-image, which is also